Again, welcome to everyone out there. My name is Tom Goldsby, and I'm your host. I come to you from the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, Tennessee. I'm pleased to be joined today by Anton DuPreez. Anton is the sales director for Kerber Supply Chain. Just a bit more about my background. I'm the Haslam Chair of Logistics and the Professor of Supply Chain Management at the Haslam College of Business at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, Tennessee. I also serve as the co-editor-in-chief of the Journal of Business and Logistics. I'm joined today by Anton DuPreez. Anton is sales director for Kerber. He covers several technologies. And Anton, I want to refer to you as ADP because you work with a lot of 3- and 4-letter acronyms, it seems. So let's start with VVM, which is Voice, Vision, and Mobility. You also cover AMR, which is Autonomous Mobile Robotics, and also SCMS, which is Supply Chain Modeling and Scheduling for Kerber Supply Chain. That's a lot of ground to cover for sure. You've worked in advanced technologies applied to distribution and supply chain for more than 25 years, dating back to your days as a programmer analyst. Again, welcome, Anton. It's great to have you with us today.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate the opportunity.
Well, I'm going to turn things over to you in just a few minutes after I cover a few items, but some of you might be joining us for the first time and wondering, what are these masterclass sessions all about? And the purpose is to tackle the challenges of today's increasingly complex supply chain, bringing you best practices and innovative thinking from academics like myself and industry insiders, senior leaders like Anton. What we're trying to accomplish, well, we want to provide guidance and insights in managing your supply chain as a competitive advantage. This masterclass is dedicated to workforce efficiencies and safety. And so we're going to be exploring ways in which we can apply advanced thinking and technologies to enhance both efficiencies in your distribution operations and safety. So today's session gets at the heart of that. You see the schedule there before you. We are in the middle of 5 sessions scheduled for this masterclass. Don't worry if you've missed the previous 2. You can go back and view those sessions on demand, just as you'll have the opportunity to review today's session on demand. We'll have that available to you inside of 48 hours after today's session. And also, please mark your calendars for the next couple of sessions. We're going to be talking with John Santagate on Thursday, talking about robotics. And then next week, we're going to round out this session with a broad view of automation and how it can improve safety and increase productivity. Also note that we've completed master classes in 3 other areas of contemporary supply chain interest, where we're applying advanced technologies to address things like labor challenges, cold storage, and also just general warehousing technology excellence. So that's where we are in the schedule. Let's go over some housekeeping items and get into today's session. So all of your phone lines are muted out there. As indicated, we're going to have a recording of today's class available within 48 hours after its completion. And again, we really encourage you to get involved, ask questions. You may submit a question via the questions tab in the GoToWebinar menu at any time throughout the session. And we're going to reserve the final 5 minutes of today's session to address those questions. Also, I direct you to the handout section, where we have a hot off the presses report available to you. This one is titled 15 Ways to Improve Worker Safety, 15 Ways to Transform Warehouse Safety, and with an intense focus on, obviously, the worker. And so with each and every one of our webinars, we offer a fresh take on the subject that's available to you to share with your colleagues. Now let's go back and take a look at the poll question that we distributed as you were coming in to the session, and some pretty interesting results here, Anton. We asked, what current technology is being used in your warehouse? And the vast majority, 67%, indicated paper. 33% indicated RF, radio frequency technology. Interestingly, 33% indicate vision and 33% suggest other. And Anton, I know you're going to focus a lot on voice today, and that came up with 0% in our survey. What's your reaction to our poll question?
Yeah, a little surprising with the voice one, I must say, Tom. However, paper still playing a really large part in supply chain operations isn't a surprise, and I think we've got some really good things to talk to on that. And the vision and other obviously being a bit of a catch-all, I would expect that to be relatively high. Vision is a very new technology relative to the others that we have on the list. So that 33%, probably higher than I expected, but that's great to see, and hopefully some of the points we cover now will speak to that.
Excellent. Well, thanks for those insights, Anton. Well, I'm going to hand things over to you in just a couple minutes, but allow me to set the stage a little bit. With regard to voice and vision, our focus today, I tried to get an estimate of just how large that market is. And unfortunately, I didn't provide attribution on this slide from a market research firm that indicated that currently our market is at $1.5 billion US for voice-directed warehousing systems. And before we went live with this webinar, Anton, you were explaining that that's probably the cumulative figure for the production of the technology, as well as distribution and implementation of the technology. So maybe a bullish, fairly robust number given your estimations for voice alone. However, you did seem to think that this notion of doubling the market size in the next 5 years at a 14.7% cumulative annual growth rate was pretty much on par. And keep in mind, the asterisk at the bottom left then suggests that the total warehouse order picking market is about $7 billion US, which you figure is also pretty keen. So we're talking about voice typically being about 20%, 21% of the market. Is that consistent with your
that stacks up pretty well, Tom, too. When we have broader surveys across supply chain executives and we look at the technologies in use, anywhere between about 20 and 30% would be a figure I'd expect to see for voice. But the growth trajectory there and the annual growth expected from it, and historically what we've seen from it, that matches very well to our experience and to other market research that's been done by ourselves and the larger manufacturers in the market.
Very good, thanks. And so those that aren't using voice or vision are probably relying on paper or RF, which our survey did kind of bear that out. But RF seems to be losing some hold on the market, given the advantage of going hands-free. So let's take a look at what some of those advantages are. And here I'm going to make reference to a blog posting from our very own Taylor Kennedy of Kerber Supply Chain. But I want to point out that these observations come from client case studies. And so these are pretty typical of what those who make the adoption, the move from paper or RF to, and probably more specifically from RF to voice, are seeing tremendous gains in productivity. And note that order picking accounts for 50 to 55% of warehouse operating costs. So if you can achieve any gain in productivity in that picking area, it can be substantial to your bottom line. And then also to see incredible improvements in accuracy, also training time reduction of up to 50%. And then we get into what I might call the touchy-feely, warm fuzzy aspects that have incredible implications on the safety and reduction of employee turnover, and also retention of employees, which is so important today. And so worker satisfaction and technology adaptability is enhanced, employee turnover reduced by as much as 50%, and then safety enhancement and damage reduction are just, it's hard to put a dollar value on those benefits. So Anton, can you help us understand how voice and vision guidance can bring about such outcomes in workforce efficiency and safety?
Yeah, certainly, Tom. Thanks. So if we can step over to the next slide. So firstly, thank you everybody for your time. Great to see the large audience we have, and good morning or good afternoon to you wherever you're located. So one of the observations I think worth highlighting is there is a lot of really cool new technology available for supply chains, and automation and robotics cover a large portion of that. What we see in the market still, though, is that the vast majority of operations are manual. People are involved in the process, or semi-automated, where you might have some form of conveyor or assistance in the process from automation, but people are still pretty key. And hopefully that bears out with your own experiences in your own operations. So with people being very key to our operations, one thing that I would challenge you to do is step out onto the shop floor in the warehouse and have a careful look at how people are moving physically, how they're handling the goods. And if you take that critical eye and have a look at those processes, you'll in very many cases see that there's an opportunity to improve the process and ergonomics for that individual. So if we look at some of those images you see on the right, these are videos and photographs from live sites. You know, a very classic example with the sort of handheld format of mobile device is somebody, you can see the lady in the top left having to use 2 fingers to grip the box while she's carrying the device and trying to move it onto the conveyor. The gentleman in the top right sort of trying to hold his handheld while he's finding the barcode, which is somewhere on the bottom of the box. And then you get into other areas which are maybe not so obvious, but bottom left, typically with a vehicle mount device with a screen and a display, that's going to be partially in line of sight of the person who's driving a pretty heavy piece of equipment at pretty reasonable speeds. Obviously, good practice in safety means don't look at the screen while you drive. If that happened everywhere as well, no one would text while they were driving because it's illegal. But human nature is that if there's something to see on a screen, we want to double check, you know, what we're doing, we'll tend to glance over there and lose distraction. Or you're stationary and you're losing time because you're stopping now to be able to interact with your system. So our kind of premise for this session is that voice and vision will offer you some of the safest and most ergonomic ways to help your associates perform that important work that they do for you. So let's dive a little deeper into how that comes about. And there are 2 main areas that I'll touch on, but perhaps before we dive into that, it's worth just briefly explaining what we mean when we say voice or vision. We've all come across Alexa, Cortana, OK Google, Siri, what you'd call consumer voice, that is geared there to let us speak and speak a very wide set of questions to a service that's going to give us a verbal response. Really what we're talking here for our definition of voice is voice-directed work, which is, let's call it more industrial or transactional in its nature. So it has a very structured dialogue that is built to guide the associate through an application-specific workflow. So a dialogue for picking or a dialogue for cycle counting. And it allows both that direction of the associate through the process and the capture of the responses or data back from the associate. So the simplistic example you see in the image there, the system will say to the lady, pick 7, and she'll confirm that she picked 7. And that whole user interface carries, as you saw from Tom earlier, very good benefits in the form of accuracy, productivity, and safety. Vision touches very similar benefit areas. The difference with vision, as probably makes sense, is in this case, rather than verbal input to the user, we're using heads-up displays, sometimes combined with augmented reality, so overlaying information on top of a picture of the real world. And those also guide associates through application-specific and typically data-rich workflows where you need to convey more information than you can in a simple phrase like pick 7. So if you look in the diagram on the right, the image on the right, you'll see cut out in the top right-hand corner a view on what that lady would be seeing in her heads-up display as she's performing her pick, so directing her to which location she should be picking from. But that's much more complex information than a location given verbally and a confirmation of pick. So you can do a lot more with vision and convey significantly more information if you need it. One thing to know about vision is that it's a mechanism for giving information to the associate, but it is always typically combined with some other data capture technology to get the information back from the real world into the system. Most commonly, like you see in the image over there, it'll involve a scanner mounted on the hand, which will then confirm that that location is the one that's being handled by the associate, and potentially confirm quantities that are being picked. So it's not an either or. These technologies can work together as well, but hopefully that gives you a fairly good understanding of what we're talking about when we refer to these technologies. So if we move on from there then and think specifically from a safety point of view, there are two main areas I'd like to touch on where safety is impacted. So the first area of safety I'd broadly summarize as awareness. And there are a number of different areas where we can improve that awareness. It's an important point to state up front on all of this that training and safe design are still your number one go-tos. We're not presenting these technologies as substitutes for that. Good practice in your warehouse should be safe practice, but we think we can bring another dimension of safety on top of what you have already. So things like slips, trips, and falls sound relatively harmless, but they make up about 15% of the accidental deaths that happen in warehouses globally, and about 25% of the injury claims. Now, I'm certainly not going to say our technologies solve all of that, but awareness, watching where you're walking. Docks, for example, 25% of all reported injuries happen on docks where you have a large drop-off. At that awareness, you'll also have a lot of MHE moving around that area. So being aware and having that ability to take responsibility for your own safety and for the people around you is pretty key. So moving vehicles, automation, even the safe stacking, storage and retrieval of product by having focus and concentration on the work that you're doing will contribute towards safety. And perhaps an obvious thing to state, but the best tool for any individual to ensure their own safety and to avoid causing injury to anyone else are their senses. Being aware of your surroundings, seeing the danger before it occurs, hearing the horn on the forklift, for example. So one thing when you look at it from this perspective, you see is that a lot of modern user interfaces that we give to our associates take away that focus of the senses. So our picture that we have in the bottom left-hand corner there is a gentleman standing in the middle of the aisle looking down at his screen to enter some data into the system. So it's a very common user interface that he'll be presented. But while he's doing that, his eyes are down and he's not aware perhaps that there is a MHE approaching. And equally, if we think back to that image on the previous slide, if the driver of the MHE is just glancing to see, he couldn't remember the location he was supposed to go to, so he's just glancing again. You have those circumstances where awareness is compromised and chance of incident is increased. So for us, a really important part of both those user interfaces we're talking, voice and vision, is that heads-up capability ensures good awareness. It also ensures good focus on the task you're doing. So if you are stacking or retrieving, you don't have to move your head away to confirm anything to the system or to validate something. You remain purely focused on what you're doing. Those two factors together have a very positive impact on safety. So hopefully that's not too much of a surprise, but hopefully it also gives you some good food for thought as to how you could potentially improve safety for your associates regarding awareness. There's another area I'd like to also address on safety, if we can step to the next slide. And this is something that is perhaps built up over a slightly longer term. Tracy, if you wouldn't, thank you, jumping us onto, and that's really ergonomics of safety. So the most common cause of injuries, physical injuries in the warehouse, involves improper lifting and handling of product. And again, I mentioned those two images on the right. When you look at them, you go, yeah, it's always worth bearing in mind that these individuals, our valued employees, are performing a very similar process 8 hours a day, possibly 5-6 days a week, over and over and over again. That's the nature of distribution centers and warehouses. And small things like bending your fingers like that and putting weight on them, or even in the bottom image of raising your arm constantly at an angle you typically don't normally use, and dealing like that, over time can contribute to physical strain, repetitive motion injuries. So these are not necessarily things that will occur suddenly, sudden events. You could put your back out lifting a heavy box, but these repetitive motions can build up over time and cause injury. Good posture and good training on how to work with products are absolutely a part of that. But the other key component of these technologies, voice and vision, that we're describing for you is that they bring a hands-free capability. So if you can imagine in those pictures what it would be like if there wasn't technology in the hands of those associates, and how they would then be moving and handling those products, and always think 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 220 days a year, and add up the impact of that motion, and it's a pretty significant change and improvement to the ergonomics of the associate. And we do find whenever we implement these technologies, user adoption, user satisfaction is outstanding. It is significantly higher than I've seen with any other technologies, because we genuinely make the associate's life better. They feel more comfortable, they can stand up straight, they can have awareness around them, they can still speak with their colleagues if they wish. But you've taken away something that's necessary but awkward and uncomfortable and sometimes unsafe in the process. So those were the two key areas of safety impacts that I think these technologies are worth investigating. A session like this around safety obviously wouldn't be complete if we didn't touch the other big safety element globally, which is the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic. And that has brought a whole set of changes to our supply chains in general, but equally, which should be our priority, making sure that we have our associates safe. They are still our most valuable resource and critical to ensuring that our supply chains, which in turn are critical to our economies and our societies, that those keep operating. So the good news is that the concept of hygiene has been with technologies like voice since their inception. So it's kind of been designed from the beginning to cope with hygiene. And there's an added layer of capability now because of the fact that COVID is a very contagious virus. But the good news is voice can operate perfectly well together with personal protective equipment such as face masks, as you see in the image. So there, the Honeywell SRX3 headset performs perfectly well with its noise cancellation and picking up the audio as the associate speaks. And again, in a design, even from the inception of these technologies, those components such as that headset foam that is touching the ear, and the entire headband that goes across the associate's head, those are all user specific. So that piece of electronics that you see there with the boom for the microphone, that separates, can get wiped down with antibacterial wipes and passed on for the next shift. But the parts that were touching the body and that microphone foam at the front of the headset, those are specific to the individual and they stay with them. So you're not transferring something that's been handled. Again, think back to those other pictures we had on the previous slides. That's a lot of handling and holding of the product, a lot of opportunity to transfer anything onto the device. With voice equipment, the device will go on your pocket, or could even go on your MHE, and you tend not to touch it for the rest of the process. Similar concept with vision. The devices are very easy to sanitize and wipe down. And some of the really interesting stuff that's available now as well is that the newer mobile devices that support voice and vision technologies have a whole range of sensors embedded in them and are able to do things like proximity tracking, warn you if you're getting too close to another associate, and keep a history of who you might have been in contact with, so that if there is then an outbreak, you can trace back to the individuals that were in contact and make sure that they're taken care of as well. So we know this because a number of our larger customers are grocery retailers. Grocery globally, really, at the start of the pandemic scaled up massively. There was huge surge in volumes through grocery, and numerous of our grocery customers scaled up accordingly with voice and operated very safely through that process. So I hope that gives you some really good food for thought and some perhaps different perspectives on these technologies as they relate to safety. With that, I'll hand back over to you, Tom, to see if we've got any questions from the audience.
Yes, excellent. Thank you.